Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's always a treat to debut an author and a book. Boy, a double pleasure today. And this beautiful book is called City Under One Roof. And Iris Yamashita is our author. Iris, you want to hold up your own book so we can all really admire? Because mine, this, for those of you who don't know what an advanced reading copy is, this is it. It's basically a printout of the manuscript. It probably still has typos in it. It may have number, but this is what I am sent to read several months, well, with luck, sometimes only a couple of weeks before the actual event. And that allows me to talk to Iris, who has happily signed our shipment of City Under One Roof. And if UPS can make it through California weather, they're going to pick them up and bring them over here. But given the state of flooding and so forth in California, they might not show up till next week. Anyway, Iris, what a pleasure to meet you. Do you, I have an introduction that I can pull, but would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much, Barbara. It's such a pleasure to be here. And this is my debut novel, so I'm so excited. I only just got my copy yesterday because mine also have my shipment has been lost in the ether somewhere, so I just went out and bought one. so, but I came from the screenwriting world. I was nominated for an Academy Award for Letters from Iwo Jima, which was a film directed by Clint Eastwood, 2006, and was nominated in 2007. And so I've been working in the Hollywood sphere for a while, but this is my first venture into writing a novel, although it was always my first love. I always wanted to write a novel, so this is a dream come true, but I could never finish a novel. So screenwriting is a lot shorter. There's only about 100 pages and a lot of white space. So I thought, oh, I can actually finish one of those. So I switched over to screenwriting, but now I'm back to my first love of writing books. And I'm so excited to have my—
Well, wonderful for you. And I would think, that we've talked to a lot of people who've gone both directions. We've talked to authors who have gone to screenwriting, and we have talked over 33 years with screenwriters who have come to books. And of course, the obvious difference for a screenwriter coming to books is that you don't have a camera and you don't have an actor. And so you have to fill in the work that the camera does showing location and landscape, and that the actor does with voice and action and so forth. So, has that been difficult for you to do that?
That's exactly what I tell people. The difference is when you're a screenwriter, you're the writer, but when you're writing a novel, you wear many hats. You're the director, the cinematographer, the costume designer, the casting director, all of that. So yes, it's much more torturous to write a novel, I would say. But it's a lot more liberating because there are less people involved. It's actually, it feels like it's longer to write, but it's easier to get to production, because there's not as many people involved that you need, and not the millions of dollars that you need as well in producing a screenplay. So I have many unproduced screenplays that no, not a lot of people can read other than your agents and the producers, but the wide audience will never see, even if I got paid for it. So it's really great to be able to hold something that is a product of your work. So that I think that's it's exactly what you said. There's so much more involved in writing the novel, but again, it's so much more liberating, and you can do original work, which is another difference. When you're working in screenwriting, most of the time you're working off of somebody else's IP, intellectual property. So you're adapting a book, or you're doing a sequel, or you're, something that already exists. So writing something original is very liberating.
Absolutely. Plus, it's your solo effort, at least until you send it to an editor. And, I've always understood that screenwriting was basically, you might write the script yourself, but producing or making a film or television is a collaborative effort. And so, obviously there's a lot of negotiation that has to evolve. When I talk to authors who have gone to screenwriting, their difficulty is chopping out, because basically a script is dialogue, isn't it, with some directions, and that's hard for many authors. And it's interesting, the books, for example, Tony Hillerman's books, the first time they were adapted for television, they didn't go very well because they're mostly internal let me try it again, internal monologues. And there's not a lot of dialogue. In the new Hillerman that Robert Redford and someone else, I think it's George R. Martin, are getting produced, which I have watched. They had to rely, bring up the dialogue and dial down everything else. So it's actually a very different experience to watch it. And they don't feel like the books in many ways, which is hard for readers. Readers often complain that the movie version is not faithful to the book, but it can't be.
Yeah, I agree, because there's as you said, there's a lot of like inner monologue. There's a lot of detail and description, which when you're screenwriting, you don't do any of that. The director decides what, how it's going to look. And so it is a very different format. And I can tell, because I have taught screenwriting, I can tell who came from writing prose, because you'll see like they have long narratives or descriptions that, that's never going to make it to the screen. So you have to chop, 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 chop. So identifying what the main beats are, as we say in screenwriting, is a lot more difficult if you're coming from writing novels, and how to pare it down. And it is very formulaic a lot of times in screenwriting, but it's because you only have 2 hours, you have very limited time. And so this is what works, and you have to kind of hone in on that, and know what Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 is going to look like.
Well, we won't go into long form television here, which is actually a much friendlier way as a rule to do a complicated book. But let's talk about Iris's book, because that's really what we're here for. It's called City Again, Under One Roof. And in the various glowing reviews, and you've had wonderful reviews, Iris, but I'm going to read the opening line from one of the starred reviews that you got. Unusual topography plays a major role in screenwriter Yamashita's atmospherically charged debut, which we could call a locked city mystery. I love that, because locked room mysteries are having a thing at the moment. And sometimes people confuse a locked room mystery with what's called a closed circle. A locked room mystery is an impossible crime. And the whole point of a locked room mystery is for the reader to figure out, and the author to have created the puzzle of how did it happen. That's not really who did it. It's not really why was it done, but it's how was it done. Whereas a closed circle, a sort of country house, or in this case, a small community, is different, because it just means that there are a whole lot of people there that are within a boundary, and those are the people involved in the crime. Those are likely to be, one of them is likely to be the perpetrator, etc. So what do you think you wrote, now that I've talked to you about which? Do you see this as a locked room mystery or a locked circle mystery, closed circle?
Yeah, definitely not an impossible crime, locked room mystery. All of these terms were kind of new to me when I came into this book world, because we don't talk about that in the screenwriting world.
Right.
It's what I've been saying is it's a locked city mystery, which is different from a locked room mystery. But fascinating to me all the same. All these different genres.
Well, one of the interesting things about crime fiction are structures, the different forms of storytelling. And for a lot of authors, especially people writing their first novel, crime fiction is a great way to go because a structure is already kind of in place. And you don't have to figure out how to tell your story. There's an outline, so to speak, for it. And that makes it really fairly interesting. But I loved your Log City. And I guess the big question is, why did you go to Alaska? I note in the acknowledgement you say something about the city of Whittier, which isn't really, your city, but maybe is kind of a inspiration for your city. But what attracted you to Alaska to do this?
Yeah, the real city of Whittier, Alaska did inspire the story. And I saw a documentary, and it was over 20 years ago, because it was back when the only way into the city is through a tunnel. And at the time that I'd seen this documentary, it was only via train. And in 2000, they opened up the tunnel to car traffic. So now you can go by car. But, that was, first of all, it was very intriguing. And then the idea that, most of the residents just live in a single building was just fascinating. And I didn't have a story back then, but it always was in the back of my mind, is what a cool setting. It sounds like there should be a story there. And it took over 20 years to actually come up with a story that was a mystery. And I had originally thought of it for a streaming outlet like a Netflix or an Amazon, and I just thought a murder mystery would be great. And I wrote a pilot, and it started there. And then so most of the times you go from book to screen somehow. And for me, it was, well, it went the opposite. I started the idea for screen, and then I moved it over to a book.
I love the idea that location inspired you. I'm a reader who really loves landscape, and I often, for me, landscape is most of the time a character in the book, which one reason I'm drawn to books like I've already mentioned Tony Hillerman, many, many books where the setting is, it's just an integral to the story. But tell me why the only way in was a tunnel. There's a mountain range in front of what
Yes.
this little community is? Is that the deal?
Yes, the tunnel goes through a mountain, and the city was originally built as a military base. I think it was kind of like a secret military base.
Ah,
And they had two high-rise buildings back then where, they all lived. And then there was an earthquake, like a 9.2 earthquake, that kind of destroyed the base. And so they shut it down. And so one building, it's just a shell of itself. And then the other, they turned it into a condo, and that's where most of the residents live. Or in my fake town, which is inspired by the real town, all the residents live there. I also changed a little bit of the topography just to so that my story could work better. But I do have both of those buildings. One, the ghostly shell building, and then the other, the condo building where they live. I do have both. And yes, the setting is very much a character. It just, it's just such a wonderful, for me, it's such a wonderful setting. And I went and I visited there, and the real city, and I did some research. There's a lot of tunnels. There's the tunnel to get to the city. There's pedestrian tunnels. There's a tunnel to get from the residence to the school. And then in my fake town, there's tunnels underneath the building.
I love it. So tunnels, of course, are vulnerable. They're vulnerable to avalanche. They're vulnerable to earthquakes. So, it's perfectly possible then if you're only ingress and egress from a place as a tunnel, then in fact it can be completely shut off. if something happens. It must have been the 1963 or 64, that terrible earthquake that
Yes,
wiped lots
exactly.
of Anchorage must have been what took out Whittier too, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. 1964. Wow, you have a great knowledge of history.
Well, I've spent time in Alaska myself, although not in Whittier, but I have a friend called Dana Stabenow who writes a wonderful Alaskan series, and she stays with us in the winter. She's right now at the moment up in New York, but I've learned a lot about Alaska, from her and also from traveling there. And, when Dana started writing back in the very early 90s, Alaska was so regional that it didn't attract much interest from New York publishing. I mean, it was just like, could have been the Solomon Islands or Tibet or something as far as they were concerned. But the cruise industry has, made a tremendous impact on people's familiarity with Alaska. And then television, like The Greatest Catch or whatever, I think, has also. So Alaska is no longer that really remote 49th state. It's much more familiar to people. And it also is one of the last real wildernesses. I mean, there are not that many places where you can truly isolate people. And, Alaska is still, because it's so vast and there's so few people there, you can do that. Or the geography of Whittier, what you call it, what is it, Port Meteor?
I gave it a fake name of Point Meteor.
I'm sorry, I have it right here, Point Meteor, right. So I mean, but that's a plausible community in Alaska. It would be harder, I think, to get people to, maybe in Wyoming, but in a more populous state, it would be harder for people to believe it. So
Oh, yeah, definitely. The isolation is a big part of the story, and maybe more so in my sequel that I'm working on, but it feels like a bit of a Western, because it's still sort of this frontier, it's where where it's not as densely populated, and there are a lot of these little tiny towns. So it has that sort of, that feeling of being like on the frontier, almost in a sense. And that really appealed to me.
right. Well, it is, except for I mean, the native communities tend to be, most of them, I think, further north and often on the coast. I've actually sailed all the way around Alaska, the Northwest Passage cruise from Seward all the way around and then across Canada to Greenland, which is extremely interesting. But Dana said another thing that I've often thought about, and it applies to other places, but particularly to Alaska, which is basically a frontier territory tends to attract the radical left and the radical right. So the people who are living in your community are probably not the normal townsfolk. I mean, there may be a few, but oftentimes they're people who really want to be off the grid for one reason or another.
Oh yeah, definitely. I had read that I had mentioned that the tunnel opened for car traffic in 2000, and actually there were some protests from the residents there. They wanted to be left alone, so they didn't like the fact that it was going to open to car traffic. So yeah, I feel like it does attract some interesting people, and that was sort of my idea when I was thinking of writing this, is that the people who live in in my fictional town are full of people who have secrets, who might be running away from something or someone. So all of the characters that I highlight in the book have a little bit of that aspect of, they have a reason for why they're there in this locked city, and including the protagonist, including the investigator.
Right, which we'll get to, because I do think that, that you have to give characters histories as well as personalities in order to make them really interesting to the reader. But we haven't mentioned climate, because one other isolating factor for this community is that in the winter, the temperatures are severe. It's also dark. for great periods. We here in Arizona are all going, oh, damn, because, we passed the solar system. We're now heading towards summer. Whereas people in Alaska can hardly wait until December 22nd when they start, moving towards sunlight. And I've been there in winter, and it is very different, when it doesn't get light until after 10 o'clock. And it's dark in the middle of the afternoon. So it does affect people's rhythms and how they lead their lives when, A, it's really cold, and B, it's dark for so long.
Yeah. So this town, it's bustling during the summer. That's the high season, because there are cruise ships that come in and out, and there's a lot more activity. There's people who come temporarily during the summer to work there. They do have restaurants and shops. And then it kind of just shuts down, and then people leave, like all the temporary help leave, and it's like the hardiest people who remain, because they do get temperatures of minus 35, and the wind factor, wind can go 150 miles per hour. So and that's kind of why living in a building for them actually works, because they don't everything is there or through a tunnel, so they don't have to endure the elements. But yeah, I think it takes a certain kind of person to be able to live through that, because I think this is true for the real city, but also in my fake city, people kind of come and go, like they live there for a year or two, and then they have to leave. So the long timers, they have a little bit of a different dynamic, because they are there for a reason. So and those are the ones that I kind of concentrate on.
So we've talked about this being isolated and remote, and an interesting community. But your investigator, let's talk about her, because she's actually an urban cop. I mean, she's from Anchorage, right?
Yes. So she comes from Anchorage, and so I have the kids giving them nicknames, like, if you're a temporary person during the summer, they call them the summer people. But if you're just a straight outsider, like our protagonist is the investigator, she's an otter, because it sounds like other, so they just call her an otter. So yes, she is the outsider in the equation, and she does get trapped there after the avalanche. And so she's investigating this gruesome murder, but she has a secret to hide as well, because she has a personal tragedy, which is what compels her to investigate this case. And it does kind of mess with her through the book, and you as the reader might not trust her as well as a narrator.
We can't do any spoilers here, but
Yeah.
her story really is central to who she is and what goes on. And as a reader, you have to really empathize with her, because it is truly a tragedy. But what is the crime? You say gruesome murder, but what is the actual crime that has happened here in Point Meteor that brings her in? And why is she brought in? It's too small a community to have any local police, or is it?
Yeah. So it starts off with I have the book in three voices. So one is obviously the investigator, but then I also have a longtime resident, a teenager, whose name is Amy Lynn, and her mother runs the local Chinese restaurant. And she is the one who finds these body parts washed up on the shore, a dismembered hand and a dismembered foot. And so the second voice, so I have, she's a second voice, and then I have another third voice, which is another resident. And she has a mental disability, and she has a pet moose named Denny, and she wears a different colored beret. She wears a different colored beret every day, and she talks in what I say word salads, because they don't always make sense. but the inspiration was, again, I had mentioned this tunnel, the only way in, and it's a very long tunnel. It's like 2.5 miles long. And I just felt like as you travel through the tunnel that you're falling down the rabbit hole and you're going to end up in this strange and crazy wonderland full of these quirky characters. So in that analogy, Kara, the protagonist, the investigator, she's like Alice falling through the rabbit hole. And Amy Lynn, the teenager, she's sort of like the white rabbit that she sometimes chases for clues. And then Lonnie is the Mad Hatter.
I was wondering where the Cheshire Cat was, but the Mad Hatter.
There's a hint there. There is a reference to the Cheshire Cat, and it's not the cat, because I think I do have a cat. It's not the cat. So if any one of your readers find that, I don't know what you get. A signed book? I don't know. From me, write me.
When we get our signed books, I always encourage our readers to read debuts, because I think it's so important that we support new authors and new voices. And also, as I frequently say to them, if you don't buy in a debut, you never get to say, I was there, or I was smart enough, or whatever, when, as it always happens, some of the debuts go on to become wild successes. Some fall away. I mean, it's not 100% hit rate, but you have to cast a wide net. But I'm really, we have spent 33 years developing new voices and introducing them to readers because we think it's so important. So Iris, there are authors whose entire careers have been traversed with us. Michael Connelly would be one example. Lisa C. would be another example, because they're quite diverse. But, we love to introduce our readers to new authors and then follow up on it. There's no point in doing a first book and then not sticking with it. So sometimes I have to really nag publishers and say, I just had to do that with one. I said, so we made a big fuss about this debut next year. Why aren't we doing something this year with the second book? And they go, oh, so.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, because I felt nothing but like a warm welcome to this world and writing books. And I find there's so many kind, like booksellers, like your bookstore and other writers who are also supportive, and a lot of Instagrammers. So I have felt nothing but love out here. I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but it feels much different from the screenwriting world.
Well, it's not competitive in the same way. There's room, there's room with readers for all kinds of voices, all kinds of stories. And our experience is that authors are very supportive of each other. And the truth is, that your success can lift other people. It isn't a competition, it's more like a support group. And the crime fiction world, I think, is much more like that than maybe the romance world, where they have been roiled by any kinds of, lots of disputes and debates. Social media, Iris, has really changed, the way everything works. And it certainly has changed the way books are brought to the public. It's changed the way that readers interact with authors. I mean, I'm telling you, way back when Sue Grafton and I, we did all our books together from G on. We're the same age. And so it's like losing my sister when she died. But Sue, right up to the end, would never answer a fan question unless they wrote her a formal letter. She did not,
Oh,
wow. But in a way, it was a really great decision, because it weeds out all the people who just have an axe to grind, or because it's free they can complain, or could comment anonymously, because social media does allow anonymity, which I think often lets people say and do things that if they had to actually hold up their hand and take accountability for it, they would not do. But so you get a chance today to interact with readers in a way that was not at all possible when I started the store. And we have the same opportunity, as booksellers. We have a lot more interaction with our customers than we did when they had to write us letters. We used to send out printed newsletters with stamps, and people sent checks, It's really kind of hard to imagine that now. We spent a lot of time folding over and stamping and mailing newsletters for years. In fact, I've been talking to the University of Arizona about taking on the bookstore files and so forth, and we have years worth, boxes and boxes and boxes worth of our monthly newsletter, because I've written a newsletter every month for 33 years to our customers. But now it's electronic, and it's a very different way of doing it. Now there's like 20,000 people, and it used to be there were like 3 or 4. The scale has really gone
Yeah,
up.
and you can reach much broader, like around the world. I
Well,
don't know.
we do. We actually have an international audience. We send books overseas every day.
Wow, that's
So
fantastic.
yeah, it's really been interesting to evolve. But I think, the way that publishing works today puts a lot more pressure on you as the author to interact with fans and communicate through social media and so forth, rather than in the old days, the publicity department doing that. So, you'll find that out as you move along. And again, you've had such kind reviews and such enthusiastic reviews from so many people that, I could quote at length here. And that's great, because that means that their social media is also working for you if they say nice things. So there's a kind of geometric progression today in how this works that was not possible before.
Yes, I think for me, the social media is it's also kind of a new thing, because I am an older writer, and even in 2006, when we were doing publicity for the movie Letters from Iwo Jima, it was a much different experience. I mean, if you did a radio podcast, you would actually have to go to the radio station, and it was much more tiring in a way, because you had to physically be at every place. So the social media, I'm still trying to get used to, and I don't have too many followers yet, so it hasn't been too hard to answer and interact with people. But yeah,
But that will
I know.
grow.
Pardon?
It will grow. And, at some point you have to set boundaries. I mean, you could waste every day. I could spend every day just doing social media. And I think it becomes overwhelming. And the more successful you are as an author, again, because of this geometric progression where you start with maybe 10 people, and then suddenly you have 300 people, and then suddenly it's 3,000 people. You do have to make decisions about the best use of your time. In other words, you could never write. You could just do social media.
Yes, I can see that.
But anyway, so we digress. But one of the things I like is it's really possible to reach a lot of people for a new author that would have been much harder before. And this month has had a number of really wonderful first novels that have come out. And you never know month to month what you're going to get. But yours is certainly one. We had another one last night, also from your same publisher, Jennifer Herrera, whose book, The Hunter, came out. And then we have another book by Anna Reyes, also from Penguin Random House, called, what's it called? The House in the Pines. It's a very rich month, and it's hard for me to, to give the same amount of attention to each one, although I really do try.
Yeah, and one who gave me a review, Mary Kubika.
Mary Kubika, she was here last night.
There last night as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so great to be among the mix of all those great writers that you just mentioned.
Well, it is, and it'll be fun to see, how the new careers progress. And then inevitably, of course, there's some that die away. So it's just life, the stream of life, how it all goes. But we like dipping our toes into it. Anyway, back to your book. Once again, I have digressed. So your protagonist comes down, your sleuth rather, one of 3 voices in the book, arrives from Anchorage. But why is she sent there? Is there no local law enforcement able to deal with this crime that has been discovered?
Yeah, there are two local police officers in my fictional town, because in the real town it's different. But in my fictional town, which is more aligned with how the city was before the year 2000, there are only two officers, and they are not equipped to handle murders. So Anchorage police is sent over to do the actual investigation. And the first officer that arrives kind of chalks it up to a phenomenon that has been happening and it's not criminal. And that is based on true phenomenon that I was just intrigued by, that there were these body parts washing up on the Pacific coast since like 2007. Yeah, and then I talked to another person who said it also was happening on the East Coast as well. So it was just something very intriguing, and but they do have an explanation that it's not criminal. So that's what the first officer who arrives just says, that yeah, it's just something that happens.
Wow. Well, we won't go into it. We don't want to do any spoilers as to what the theory is that random body parts are washing around in the Pacific and showing up. I mean, I think on the East Coast, some of it is there's just been a higher suicide rate or accident rate, or fishermen, who get tangled up in nets and all kinds of things. But but the premise in your book is that maybe this is intentional. It's not just whatever the phenomenon of body parts is, but somebody has actually been killed.
Yes, that's the premise, that our protagonist, the investigator, arrives after the first one. She shows up because she has an inkling that maybe it's that it is a murder, and then she does discover some evidence when she's there that it actually was a murder.
So, I mean, among the local residents, the moose is great. I really love the moose, but they're kids, and I think they're interesting too, because there's some teenagers that are. And how do you really contain teenagers, and aren't they bored in a community like this? I mean, do they have much of the way of internet access or whatever? What is it they do to keep themselves, busy?
That was a question that I had. So when I went to Whittier, Alaska to do some research, I did ask one of the younger residents, what do you do here for fun? And he said, it's mostly church and bonfires.
I like that. That sounds sort of medieval in a way. I like that. But I mean, I asked that because when we were sailing across the top of Canada and these various native communities that are right there on the ice, but of course the ice is melting and it's not going well. They all had these enormous satellite dishes, and they clearly had internet access. So even though you were way up there, at the Arctic Circle or not too far from it, everybody was chatting away. We had internet access on the ship. So I would assume that your community would have had,
Oh yes, they definitely have internet access.
And what about cell phone? Is that, do they have a cell phone?
They also have cell phone. But I'm imagine, right, there's probably a range where the internet and the cell phone works. And if you go out towards the wilderness, you're going to lose all of that. But yeah, we did stay there because you can stay there. Like, as in my fake town, there is an inn in the building. In the real town, there's also other inns that are not part of the building. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure if they're open all year round. I mean, obviously summer is the high season.
Right.
And so they do have internet access, at least in the inns.
Well, when the weather's decent. I mean, unfortunately, it could be both cell phone and internet seriously disrupted
That is true. That's
by
true.
weather. So it's not, and the reason I mentioned that is one of the things that makes it so hard for writers of contemporary crime fiction is how do they disable people's cell phones or internet or whatever in order, to accomplish various things. I mean, I have an author, for example, who had to sink a chase under Central Park where there was no cell phone penetration, and there's a lot of like the batteries die, the batteries give out or the cell phone is dead and all, but I mean you can't, a lot of mystery plots don't work if there is this broad communication available. And so you're lucky that in the place you are, you have a natural,
Yeah. Yeah. And going out of range,
yeah.
because, and that is true, I think, of Alaska, because a lot of it is wilderness. And so, there are places where no one lives. So there's obviously not going to be any cell phone, or, there's not going to be reception because they don't have cell phone towers in the middle of the wilderness. So that is, again, I think that's one of the attractive things about Alaska, again, being kind of like the frontier where it's, not all the trappings of civilization are there in every remote area of Alaska.
So to sum up, I'm going to quote more from this fabulous starred review here. When 17-year-old Amy Lynn and friends discover a severed hand and foot, notice severed, which does imply intention rather than accident, hand and foot in Hidden Cove, where they retreat to smoke pot, another thing that the teenagers do to, pass the time. Detective Kara Kennedy comes from Anchorage to investigate, and she may have hidden motives for wanting to be on the case. Then a blizzard and an avalanche block the tunnel, and harrowing secrets and lingering lies surface, along with more body parts. The disappearance of a mother and her two sons prompts the search that leads to a spellbinding, unforgettable climax in an unpredictable resolution. Now, we're not going to talk about that, but I have read it and I can agree that it's definitely an unpredictable resolution. So it points to you because, one of the reasons a book really works, Iris, is if the end is as good as the beginning. If if the reader is motored through the book and it had a great premise and then it just dies, or it's implausible or it's stupid, the reader is really disappointed, but you managed to avoid that. Do you think screenwriting, helped you develop the surprise?
Well, yes, as I had mentioned, I was thinking of this originally for a streaming series, and I was working with a producer who had wanted to take it out and sell it, and as part of the prep for pitching it, you need to come up with a season, but then also like, well, what if they want a season 2? What are you gonna tell them? So I came up with a season 2, and that's what I pitched the same thing to the book editor, and miraculously got the 2-book deal.
Well, no, I wanted to bring that out because, another reason for people to be interested in a first novel is that they're guaranteed there's a second novel. And sometimes that doesn't happen. It's sort of rare, but there are moments when, or have been occasions rather, when an author has published a first book and for various reasons, that's it. I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird's the obvious one, or Gone with the Wind, but and sometimes, in fact, it's the raging success of the first book that basically the author just, that's it, can't repeat it, or other circumstances intervene. But in general, a reader would like to know that there is going to be more. So you are working, or you said you were what, nearly complete with your second book?
With a first draft. So yes, I'm almost done with the first draft, and then so we'll knock on wood and hope it can make it out the year after.
So does it have Amy in it again?
What I'll say is it has some of the same characters that you'd be familiar with in book 1, and then some new ones.
Some new ones, right?
Yes.
Well, yeah, no, that's Right. Well, I think that's wonderful news. Let's call Patrick back and see if there are any questions or comments that he would like to make. Um, Patrick's been to Alaska at least once.
I have been to Alaska. Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Yes, it is
Yeah,
beautiful.
one of the questions that's come in is, do you have kind of an overarching vision of where you're going with the series, or are you just like one sentence ahead?
I do usually outline ahead of time so that I know where I'm going. But I don't know everything. So yeah, when I started reading or started writing the first book, I knew sort of that all the residents had secrets, or all the characters had some kind of secret, but I didn't always know what the secret was, or it changed.
Right.
So that's kind of with book two, I was pressured for time, so I did follow more of an outline. But it did change. Everything always changes when you start writing.
Right. Barbara, has Dana read the book? Do you know?
She hasn't yet. She until her own next Alaska novel comes out, I don't think she really wants to read any other Alaskan mysteries. And there's always some fear that something will cross over unintentionally when you do that. Iris, have you found that to be true already? Because a lot of writers talk about what they read when they're writing, or what they don't read when they're writing.
That has been more of a problem with being in Hollywood, because they are much stricter about, we only want one mystery in a cold place for the whole year. Like it's
Right.
they're much stricter about what they will show. And if one studio has one, then they're not going to do another one that's even like remotely in the same genre or territory, so it's much harder, because I'm always running into that. I'm always like, I have this great mystery in a cold place. Oh, we already have a mystery in a cold place, and that's the door shuts. Whereas the book world, it's a lot more open. I think, you can have several mysteries in a cold place with a female lead, and as long as there's big differences, it's all right.
Actually, it's often true that books kind of clump together, and become promotable by virtue of the fact that there are several. If you like one, you'll like the other. As I say, it's really not a competitive community.
Yeah. So I do like that about the book world, that it's not as restrictive in terms of what you can write about and when, like it seems like you have to have a stroke of luck to get the window where no one else has a cold city mystery that year. It's a lot of luck.
Who do you like to read?
I'm a slow reader, so I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't read a lot of mysteries. I I'm talking about a book that came out a long time ago, but I really, really loved, is All the Light We Cannot See. I'm sure that's a favorite book of a lot of your readers, but it's definitely a kind of writing that, is really something to strive for. But I have started reading, because now that I know that mystery is my genre, I have started reading mystery books, and I'm in the middle of reading one of Mary Kubika's books, and I'm really drawn into it. And I did just purchase her book that came out yesterday, so I'm going to dive into that one as well. But
I'm trying to identify some of the books behind you, and is that
a lot of these are.
Is that a Brando biography?
Oh yes, I did actually. I met him and I got it signed.
Ooh,
wow,
good for you.
So
cool.
This is a long story, but he told me that, oh, don't just because it says I wrote it, don't believe everything.
Ghostwriting is an honorable profession that we're finding more and more about as time goes on.
But yeah, this is a long story. This was when I was working a full-time job, and he was on a environmental consortium, and our company was working with him. So this was before I got into Hollywood even.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Let's
But
see. Anybody
most
else?
of these are reference. I did really like this book, Testament of Youth, when I was growing up. This was like,
Okay.
this was my first book about war that really struck home with me, like, oh, this is what war is like. Because, I hadn't experienced war, and this is the first one that made me feel like what war was like.
I have a question about your title. I think it's a great title. Was that yours, or was
This
that
for
the
City Under
publisher?
One Roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, titles are always hard. I was first trying to make a Alice in Wonderland reference, but no one liked that. And then I was thinking, I did throw out the City Under One Roof. I think they wanted, they had mentioned City of Ice and Lies, because that was, it referenced cold, and it referenced a little bit of intrigue with lies. But then
Sounds like a George R.R. Martin title or something.
Or Russian.
Yeah.
It sounds like a
Exactly.
Russian spy story or something.
Right.
Yeah, I saw a lot of books titled City of Ice. So I just thought, it's going to get lost in the mix. And then this is really representative, the title of what's really unique about this place. So it worked out well, I think, hopefully.
Yes, no, I
Great
think it's an
title.
excellent
Yeah.
title. I agree with Patrick. It's expresses your Lock City concept
Right.
very well.
Yeah, and then the graphic designer did such a great job to make it look, give that feeling of cold and mystery. So, yeah, happy with it.
Let's see here. That's about it for the actual questions that have come in.
Okay, anything you'd like to add?
Other things that I've talked about. I think I already talked about the difference between writing for screen and writing for prose, but it again, it feels great to be able to do something original here in the book world, which is very different from the screen world.
Original and all your own, which is really very
and having more control over the finished product, and it does feel like it's your own creation. So,
well, it's been a real pleasure to meet you, Iris, and to talk to you. City Under One Roof, we highly recommend it. Iris has said she's signed our books, and if UPS slogs through whatever atmospheric river is currently bedeviling wherever she is in California, they will eventually get here. Please don't send them until you feel like the weather will be friendly, because they can get ruined, and we're not in a hurry for them.
Yeah, no, the weather has cleared up, but I think it's just there was a slowdown from the days where it was very heavily raining.
Okay.
So today is actually sunny, so it's actually fine, but it's just that I think everything got slowed down by the last 2 days.
Right. Well, anyway, thank you for doing that. And I want to thank all of you for watching us this evening. And
thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
It was really our pleasure. Thank you, Iris. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody. Good night. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.